Good morning. Welcome to Policy Exchange's latest in our series of podcasts on the Ukraine crisis. Our guest of honor today is Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, previously commander of the US Army Europe, who played so important a part in laying the groundwork in advising the government of Ukraine on its defenses, which have proven so efficacious in the conflict of recent days. General Hodges, you've been a great friend to Policy Exchange. Welcome back here. Just very interested in the first instance, because you always spoke truth to power. What you said was not always comfortable to your superiors in NATO, in the US Department of Defense. I'd just be very interested in your initial take on how you assess the performance of the US administration so far, and what it's done well, what more it could be doing, where it could do better.
Dean, thank you. I actually have been very impressed with the Biden administration's efforts over the last few months, particularly from a diplomatic side. Maybe the best diplomatic effort I've seen from the United States since 1995 and the work that was done to bring about the Dayton Peace Accord. Secretary Blinken has demonstrated competence and calmness, and the evidence of all this, of course, is this unified alliance plus other partners in pushing back on Russian aggression. That to me has been significant. And then to see countries like Germany, for example, to come about change their policy so dramatically, not because the U.S. Department of State pushed them, but because the U.S. Department of State worked closely with allies. I think that's an area that's they've done very well. I think this use of intelligence to share intelligence in a public way, which must have been very uncomfortable for many of our intelligence professionals, but it got the Russians on the back foot in the information space in a way that I've not seen before. And the fact that none of our allies challenged the assertions by the Pentagon about what Russia was about getting ready to do tells me that the administration had earned their confidence. Obviously, after what happened 20 years ago, you could excuse some of our allies for being skeptical when we say we have proof about what Russia is doing. So that's impressive. The area where I would fault them is actually in just the last 5 days. It seems like we have lost some momentum in the information space. The tone has changed to one of much more caution. There's way too much about what we don't want to do or what we cannot do versus what we need to do. I don't get the sense of urgency coming out of the Pentagon these days that I think is necessary.
Describe some of the specifics on that loss of momentum and urgency as you described it.
I see the president almost daily publicly saying, we're not going to do this because that would mean World War III. And he says it with such dramatic emphasis. And I think that that opens up the door for the Kremlin because, I mean, we've declared what we won't do, which then tells them how much wider they can threaten, they can control, they can push, because we're already saying we're not going to do certain things. I don't know that that's helpful.
Why would it not lead to World War III? In what way is that presumption that we hear a lot of in the media and indeed from decision makers, policy makers? Why is that, in your view, not necessarily correct?
But first, it goes to the definition of World War III. The image in everybody's head is that it means endless mushroom clouds, nuclear exchanges, and I just don't think that that's what's going to happen. I tend to agree with Fiona Hill that we actually are already in World War III, but in the newer construct of information, cyber, not just steel and nuclear explosions. And so I also don't think that Putin has intentions. He certainly has the capability, and he would do it, but I don't think he will do it, to launch nuclear weapons on his own.
And on the basis of your information, who and how has the president and others got spooked by this World War III sort of General Sir John Hackett-like image, which I think you were invoking earlier?
Yes. Um, I'm not entirely sure. I think part of this is the president's own personal sense of his thinking about the use of force has evolved over the last 30 years or so for a variety of reasons. I think this is a part of it. But also, the administration, remember, many of the people in the administration now were also in the Obama administration. And they were very skeptical of Russia as a threat or as a power. You'll recall, and they're still. Uh, when I hear, we can't give them MiG 29s from Poland because it might escalate. I think there is a overly cautious, reflexive almost attitude towards Russia and the use of force. We have every advantage. We have every advantage, but yet we're allowing Russia, which is to be blunt, is a pissant country that has nuclear weapons and endless gas reserves, but it doesn't have the ability to go head to head with NATO. Why are we so reluctant to for us to call the shots, for us to demonstrate capability without having to go into Ukraine? And instead, it's the other way around. Clearly, the alliance is 100%, or the administration is 100% correct that keeping all 30 nations of NATO together is essential. That's absolutely essential. I think that with American leadership working with our closest allies, we could bring along the rest of the alliance and not be so intimidated by the Kremlin.
Obviously, with the tragic situation in Ukraine, Russian forces rampaging through much of the country, the pressure's enormous on President Zelensky. Just be interested in your take on him saying last night that Ukraine would not now be joining NATO, obviously one of the key Russian war aims.
So first of all, I would challenge your part of your question where you said Russia is rampaging through much of Ukraine. That's not true. They actually have troops on probably less than 10%, 15% of Ukrainian territory. They're stocked in almost every place. In fact, I would say that Russian forces potentially will be reaching Clausewitz's culminating point in the next 9 or 10 days. They don't have enough time, they don't have enough manpower, and they don't have enough ammunition to continue this operational approach of attrition, smashing cities to put refugees on the road. Having said that, I think President Zelensky's comment about NATO and membership, um, I don't. I wish he hadn't done that, of course, but the pressure is on him. But I actually don't think that that was Putin's true war aim, but it may give him the off ramp he needs just in time because the Russians are in trouble here. I mean, they're in big trouble. They're asking China for help. They're recruiting Syrians to come in. They're starting to relocate troops out of Armenia to come back in to join this fight. They have problems inside the formations they have now. They have started scapegoating the FSB. So there's so many things that are going wrong, and I think that we are in the decisive phase of the campaign. Actually,
And describe the elements of that decisive moment, as you said, that Wendepunkt, as Germans might say. What's the nature of it for the layman who'd be
so
interested?
for Clausewitz, the culminating point is that point in a campaign when the attacker no longer has the ability to continue the attack. Either for because of the enemy's resistance, the available resources, typically manpower, whether it's casualties or you just don't have enough. You lose all impetus, and that's what I think we're in the front edges of that now, and probably by 9 more days from today, I think they will have totally ground to a halt. They don't have unlimited ammunition, which is what you require if you're talking about smashing all these cities. I was in Kiev 5 weeks ago, met President Zelensky, by the way. This is a massive city. And it's not laid out like Manhattan, where everything runs north, south, and east, west. It is a very complex urban terrain on the banks of one of Europe's largest rivers. The Russians do not have the manpower to encircle it, let alone capture it. They still haven't captured Mariupol after 3 weeks, and that should have been the easiest of the major cities for them to capture due to its proximity to existing Russian forces and their fleet out in Sea of Azov. So I'm not impressed with their ability to carry out their strategy. Ammunition is the problem, and I say this not because I have access to classified information on what they started with, but I know that none of us, the United States, the UK, Germany, France, none of us has adequate ammunition stocks, especially of what we call the preferred munitions, the high cost precision weapons. For the Russians, that would be Iskander and Iskander in particular munitions, but also the cruise missiles that they've launched at Yavoriv, for example, the other day, the place that you and I visited together a few years ago, when we had just given Ukrainians counterfire radar, and you saw them using those. So the ammunition stocks they started with are going to be low. They clearly underestimated how long it would take to do what they're doing. So they're already in deficit there. And then what we know is that ammunition consumption in combat is always higher than what you may have planned for. It's just until you've done it, you don't realize how much ammunition you go through and how difficult it is to transport. And frankly, how expensive and time long it takes to produce these higher end munitions. Sanctions have also prevented Russia now from importing some of the weapons that they used to get from Finland, Slovenia, and other places. So, because of that, I think that do not have the ammunition to reduce Kiev in this medieval approach that they're taking. On the manpower side, of course, the number 900,000, which was the number advertised at the beginning of all this, that they have this huge 900,000 man army. I would be willing to bet they have less than 600,000 warm bodies that they could put in a uniform. And certainly that's not 600,000 Grenadier Guards. I mean, we're talking about the full range of people. Most of the troops that have done all the fighting for them over the past several years actually come from a very small part. Their airborne division and Spetsnaz. And then, of course, some of these mercenaries from what used to be called Wagner Group, which is now, I think it has the name of the League or something like that. So the problems they're having with desertion, people abandoning equipment, um, a group of naval infantry refused to fight the other day. Um, they have real problems, and I don't think they can sustain a war of attrition.
Can I ask? There've been some military commentators been talking about two very different wars. One in the north and east, the other in the south, and particularly the vulnerability of Odessa and other sea points to amphibious and naval assaults, which would effectively leave the Ukraine as a landlocked country were the operations there to be successful. Would you care to reflect a little bit on what the vulnerabilities for Ukraine are in the south and what more NATO and allies could do to help there?
So the biggest advantage that the Russians had, I thought, going in was in sea power. I mean, the Ukrainian Navy barely exists except in the form of some brave sailors and smaller coastal defense craft. Obviously, when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 and seized Crimea, they got all the naval facilities and most of whatever vessels that Ukraine possessed. Most of them, not all, but most. So they're pretty much uncontested there in the Black Sea and in Sea of Azov. In fact, they brought the Caspian Sea flotilla last year. And this really impressed me. The flotilla sailed up the Volga River, connected over via the Don Volga Canal, and then down the Don River into Sea of Azov. And they've been there for the past year. This gives them the capability to launch missiles almost endlessly into Mariupol, for example. as well as into other coastal areas. So I thought, frankly, I was wrong. I did not think the Russians would launch an all-out attack. I thought that they would merely go after coastal areas, as you described, to isolate Ukraine from the Black Sea, and choke the economy like a boa constrictor with the threat of invasion until the economy collapsed, and then the Zelensky government collapsed, and then the Russians would be able to put their own guys in, probably without worrying about sanctions. Instead, well, as I said, I was wrong, and they've launched this all-out attack. I'm not sure that Odessa is going to fall. I mean, they haven't even actually come after Odessa yet. They're still dealing with protests inside Kherson. They've got to do a lot more. They can't get past Mykolaiv yet. They've got a lot of work to do before they could actually invest Odessa. And so this is part of the challenge they have, and why I would advocate for giving Ukraine more anti-ship capabilities, whether it's missiles, and they already have a naval strike missile system, but also mines. Get mines out there. Now, my Navy friends would kind of chuckle right here in the Army guy talk about we need more Navy mines, and they would appreciate that I don't fully understand all that's required. But when I think about the campaign of Gallipoli, it was a stalwart Ottoman sailor that, after the Allied navies, the Royal Navy and the French Navy, thought they had cleared the Dardanelles, this Ottoman sailor would go back out with a mine-laying vessel, very small one, and reseed the mines in the straits that had significant effect. I think there are Ukrainian sailors that are capable and willing to do something like that as well.
And has the naval component of Allied NATO assistance been sufficient, or has it been overly focused, as your remark may imply, on the land component and air components inevitably?
Yeah, I don't see evidence of anything that we're doing. It was very helpful that Turkey finally closed the straits using their authority under Montreux Convention of 1936. But it was about 2 weeks too late. I mean, it was after that last group of 6 or 8 vessels entered the Black Sea. Hopefully, they'll keep it closed for an extended period of time to Russian Navy vessels. That was important, just not timely. I would have hoped that NATO, with all of our advantages that I mentioned earlier, that we would be in the Black Sea, in international water and in international airspace, like my favorite ship, the HMS Defender. Get out there and challenge. That doesn't mean it has to be head-to-head conflict. I'm talking about international water, international airspace. Right now, the Russians have pretty much run of the entire Black Sea to do what they want, and we need to be doing some things to make them look over their shoulder. A quarantine of their Russian Navy base in Tartus in Syria, for example, a large SNAP exercise in Georgia, like the U.S. and the U.K. have done in previous years. Things to remind the Russians how vulnerable they are now that they have pulled everybody into Ukraine.
And looking at the far west of Ukraine, or the northwestern border, we discussed the other day the possibility of Russian troops entering from Belarus, potentially to cut off the major land border of Ukraine with Poland. Do you still see that as a major threat, and that might be the next sort of step?
I think that the Russians are wanting to sever the lines of communication because they recognize that the Ukrainian logistical situation actually is only going to get better with each passing day. As we get our stuff in place there in Poland and elsewhere, that this line of communication grows and grows, and as the distribution network inside Ukraine matures. So the Russians obviously will want to sever that. I think that was why the 2 bombers launched those 30 cruise missiles the other day at Yavoriv, to prevent it from becoming such an important logistics hub. That's not the only one. There are other places, I would imagine. And the Pentagon has been remarkably tight-lipped about the sort of structures, which I think is a good thing. We don't need to help the Russians with targeting. but I think that Belarus is it's very interesting. They have not agreed to come in with troops, although I think there are some troops from Belarus that are involved. But I mean, they don't have a consequential amount. Uh, what is not helpful is that they allow Russia to shoot from Belarus and to launch Russian activities from Belarus. I just can't tell how much capability they still have left that could seriously threaten a land force that would threaten Lviv, that could sever the lines of communication. I think they're running out of stuff.
When you look at it in the round, do you think it's still achievable for Ukraine to manage a performance perhaps like Finland in the Winter War of 39-40 and in subsequent conflicts there between the old Soviet Union and Finland? In other words, they will lose some territory, they may suffer certain reverses on the battlefield, but the moral, they won a moral strategic victory that ensured Finnish independence for another generation, albeit perhaps for certain NATO countries in that period, perhaps a little too neutral. The term Finlandization still echoes from that era, was one that many Finns weren't, of course, very keen on. I'd just be grateful if you're sort of projecting ahead, whether you think that Finnish model is a possible outcome still for Ukraine.
Well, Russia has already lost. I mean, Russia has lost uh, the in almost every category, economically, politically, and on the battlefield. Yes, maybe at the end of the day, um, they will probably still hang on to Crimea. Although I think because I believe Ukraine is going to be in a much stronger negotiating position here in a couple more weeks, that the going in position should be we want all of our terrain back, all of our territory back. Don't just roll over on Crimea or Donbass automatically, but at a minimum, it should be going back to the pre 24 February line uh, at a minimum. Otherwise, then Russia's aggression and murder of civilians is rewarded, and everybody needs to keep this in mind. We're talking about murder of civilians, intentional killing of civilians, um, like Srebrenica. Are we doing enough to prevent the murder of innocent people? I'm not sure we are, but Ukraine is. They're doing everything they possibly can, and I think they have absolutely the chance to win, not just avoid losing, but to actually they are defeating Russian forces today. Russia has stalled everywhere, so um, I don't like this phrase Finlandization. I love the notion that of what Finland did to the Soviet Union in the Winter War, but I don't like the idea that somehow we should dictate or that Ukraine should be willing to accept, okay, we'll be neutral. Because nobody in their right mind will believe that Russia would ever respect that neutrality. They don't respect any agreement they sign. And so I think that perhaps there's some sort of a ceasefire or whatever, but I think Ukraine will continue to bleed Russia. Every day that Russian troops stand where they are today, they're going to bleed and Ukrainians, the spirit I've seen from their population, they outnumber the Russians. I mean, there are more Ukrainian troops than there are Russian troops inside Russia, and there's not a lot of others. There's not a whole nother Russian formation lurking in the woods somewhere. Over 50% of all of their combat power is committed. That's incredible. So I think that we are I can see a very positive outcome here.
General, thank you for a masterclass this morning. As I say, chance also to recall your own part in preparing Ukraine for its own defense when that day would come. And I know when the history books are written, you will have a prominent place in that. Thank you for your time this morning. We look forward to welcoming you back soonest here to Policy Exchange. Over and out.
Thank you.